fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
I'm Arthur.
And it is, our third week of science fiction coverage?
Third week
for the month of January. Yay! We're watching sci-fi things. We're talking about stuff that I have no knowledge of at all.
Yeah, and you love it, so it works out.
I mean, it's fine. You know what? I'm okay with it. I don't go seeking it out, but I'm okay with learning about it a little bit. Which is also, I guess, kind of what we're getting into today. Because we're sort of going to talk about the idea of, like, how science fiction is, or I guess, like, how the idea of hard science fiction is becoming more popular, or has become more popular over the past, X number of years. Not that it wasn't before. There were quite a few older stories that fall into that vein as well. But with the sort of rise in popularity of things like Andy Weir's novels and stuff, and the idea of, I guess, the heroes in these stories taking, like, actual material around them and making something out of it, or finding...
They're doing real science.
Yeah, finding concrete solutions to things that maybe we find more relatable in terms of, like, a reader or something. I don't know.
MacGyver's in space. That's how I see it.
Yeah, that's it.
I love seeing it that way.
Before we get started with everything, do you want to do a little what's on your nightstand right now? Talk about what you're reading?
There's water.
What?
There's a...
You're such a dork. You know what I'm talking about, too. You're such an idiot.
I guess, it kind of relates to that. I'm reading still, but I'm getting close to it. Revenant X.
Yeah.
It's the second book of the Red Space series by David Wellington. I read the first one, Paradise 1. It is absolutely incredible. If you love anything related to sci-fi and horror, he does a really great blend of both of those genres, and Paradise 1 was amazing. This current one is also very good, recently released. We got an ARC from him as well on that, so that was really fun, actually, to start getting to read it a little bit earlier. That is right now, and then my other book is, I think I'm going to mess the name up, Transmentation Transience by Darkly Lem. It is... Which,
great name for a sci-fi
That
author.
is such a cool name.
It might be a pseudonym, but that's okay.
I don't care. That is a cool name.
Yeah.
It is a first book from his series.
I believe this is meant to be a new series.
That's it. It's a new series. Apparently, it is very close to the Expanse series, and for fans of Jeff VanderMeer, which I do like some of it.
Yeah.
It is an ARC. It is due to be released March 18th of this year. I'm very, very excited to read it because from what I read about it, it is kind of like a weird blend of multiverse adventure. So
speaking
I'm
of
all
hard
for it.
science also, I think there's some stuff in that one from what I remember reading in the description. Anyway.
Right, that's it, exactly. Yeah. So we're going to find that quite soon, and we'll get a review up on it.
Shout out Blackstone Publishing for sending
so
us
great.
a copy of that. It's great. We've had a couple of ARCs, a few ARCs that come through from Blackstone, and they've all been pretty cool so far. So I think we're really having a good time with that, which is great.
What is on your nightstand?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Because you change it every week, so I have no idea.
Well,
anymore.
I have a couple right now, I guess, that I can talk about. So
what was the last one you finished? That was really cool.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so I recently finished also an ARC. This isn't a flex. We just happen to be reading all of these at the same time.
Because we need to.
Yeah, because we need to. We're writing reviews for them before they're published. So I recently finished Liar's Kingdom by Christine Colella, which is a YA kind of retelling of Cinderella, but done very fantasy focused, obviously, but very set post the glass slipper being fit back on Cinderella's foot kind of thing, and kind of everything that comes after that, and the idea of what if that's not really... what if you thought you just assume that these stories always end with this little happily ever after and we ride off into the sunset, et cetera, but what if that's not really what happens? What if there's more to it than that? And, of course, a lot of the idea that's explored has to do with the Cinderella character breaking away from basically the abuse that she's suffering at the hands of her stepmother and stepsisters. So there's a lot more to it in terms of there's an enemies to lovers kind of thing in it, and all kinds of other aspects of it there, but I won't give away too much. But anyway, when you guys are hearing this episode, there is a review that does have a few more spoilers on it that is up on the website at fullybooked.ca, so you can always go check that out if you want to. But it was a really fun one. It was really fun. It was fast paced. It got right into the story, which I loved. So yeah, shout out to Page Street YA for sending over a copy of that. That was very cool, and I was very happy to have gotten it, and I can't wait to maybe get more down the line. That would be really fun. And I'm I don't know, to 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Robel. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, which was published, I don't know, this past fall, I believe.
Right.
I mean, obviously, shockingly enough, it's about like Hitchcock's type stuff, and it's set. Basically, it's a thriller. Follows a group of friends from college who are getting together, 15 odd years after they graduated, because one member of the friend group had acquired the literal house from Psycho.
That's cool.
And turned it into a hotel that's all things Hitchcock. Like it's got like, a bunch of memorabilia in it that he's purchased and all these kinds of things. And he's invited everyone there as like an opening thing for like a free stay. But obviously there's, of course, in thriller fashion, there's a lot of tension due to old issues within the friend group that everybody tries to ignore and cover up, but obviously things come to a head, and then there are like a bunch of other, I don't want to spoil it, but there are a bunch of other things that kind of happen along the way too. And so yeah, I'm at the point where I'm legitimately trying to figure out like who's actually done anything. I'm not 100% sure. So,
I would visit that.
Yeah.
That sounds cool.
I mean, the hotel sounds awesome. I was like, that sounds great. It's interesting. The only thing that's been a little bit tough with it is that it's really hard to find any of the characters likable, which is difficult, I find, when you're reading a story, because you're like, I need someone. I need someone to connect with. Yeah. And like they all kind of suck. So it's a little bit hard, but overall, like the story itself and like, at least like the level of like intrigue has been interesting. So I'm very curious to see kind of what the final twists are before the end of the story.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So let's, I guess, do we want to maybe talk a little bit to start off with about kind of some of the defining differences between like, maybe more like traditional or classic science fiction stories versus like hard science fiction as a subgenre?
Yeah, I mean, sure, that makes sense. So, I mean, science fiction is kind of a broad genre in general. It
really
can mix
is, yeah.
a lot of stuff. Like in the past episode, we spoke about how we can mix it with romance and how we can mix it with horror and fantasy and everything. So there's a lot of elements. You can add a lot of things to it.
Yeah.
But at base, essentially, science fiction is, I guess, anything that is extrapolated from current science and then made into its own universe or into its own devices. And you just make the basic scientific principles work for the story that you want it to be. And then you can add whatever you want to it or mix whatever you want to it.
Right.
But there is also kind of like a subgenre of science fiction that is basically, well, it's called hard science.
Yeah.
Which is science fiction, but you don't go too far as extrapolating some kind of device that can travel faster than the speed of light, right?
You're right. Like it has to be like more legitimately based in its scientific principles that currently exist.
Exactly.
I mean, like things that we can actually understand or theories that already exist.
Exactly. That's the second point. Is the theories that already exist and the current things that you can actually do things with, so that like, if someone describes something extremely specific in a book, you can probably recreate it at home if you have the right, tools and ingredients and whatever it is.
You can find like a lecture about it because it's something potentially that like actually exists.
A lot of the times what authors do is that they take that base principle and then they kind of try to twist it a little bit, or they make the final result to be something a little bit more than what you could actually make on Earth.
Sure.
With that stuff. So, because you have to make it relatable enough, but also has to be fiction-y enough, I guess.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, like, look, it's science fiction, right? So yes, we're taking the idea at the base of things, like in the sense that, we spoke in our first episode this month, we spoke about the idea of Frankenstein being like one of the earliest, or considered one of the earliest science fiction stories ever written, right?
Yeah, and funny tidbit, we have Claire, I believe, who wrote that article that is...
Oh, yeah.
That's the original...
manuscript.
Well, actually, the original published book of Frankenstein. I think it comes in 3 tomes or something like that. It is the most expensive book ever sold. Yeah, it was sold for like $850,000
or something. Yeah,
and it's one of the 3 published that currently exists. And it's, funny enough, a science fiction book at all intents and purposes.
See, I remember when we talked about this at the beginning of the month, you were like, But that's the thing, and that's what I guess that's why like science fiction itself is so broad.
Yes.
Because yes, you can take a story like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and be like, it's a horror story, and yet it is. And it's not just the horror about the monster. The horror is about the man who's creating him,
Yes.
and like his sort of god complex that he has because of it. And the horror is the sort of the horrific things that the monster suffers once he becomes sort of cognizant of what's happening to him after he's reanimated, all that kind of stuff. I guess like you don't think about it from like that perspective as much, but when you get into like the medical aspect of it and what's being done,
how he is created,
and how
that is
he's
really
created, that's it in terms of like obviously like piecing body parts back together and like medical science in that aspect, as well as like utilizing like lightning and technology and harnessing that technology in order to animate this corpse, basically reanimate this corpse essentially and bring it back to life. Yeah, so it is. So, it seems like weird sometimes. It is very broad. But obviously, like, when you get into the hard science fiction, that, while, yeah, like you're saying, there will still be aspects of it that are maybe a little bit less believable in the sense where they stretch things a little bit more because, of course, it's still fiction. It's still a story, and we're still writing the majority of the time to entertain an audience, obviously. Yeah. There's more like, it feels like more solid, I guess, or more based in fact as opposed to other types of science fiction.
Exactly, because you could technically do that, like as morbid as that is, you can technically take body parts and stitch them together. Yeah. And
I guess you could shock them with lightning.
You could shock them with lightning, and you might get some kind of a weird response only for a second because you made the blood beat, the heart beat, or maybe the blood
you did something to it. Yeah.
Nothing will happen, obviously, until so far we haven't succeeded.
No,
but
I hope no one's trying. Don't do that.
So that's the thing, is that like that is science fiction.
Yes.
And that is hard science because you can technically do all that, and you will get a scientific reaction, I guess, out of it. But then the extra element to that is that it actually works.
Yes.
Right. So that's the thing. So that's the same thing. So that's kind of like the basis of hard science, that you take something that exists, like you said, theories or things that actually work, but then the extra element to it is that they actually work. You can actually travel fast in the speed of light, not by physically doing that, but maybe by warping the space and time around you.
Yes.
There's a theory around that.
Right.
There is a possibility to do that. Same thing as wormhole travel, right? Traveling through a wormhole, technically speaking, if you go from one distance to another distance, you are going faster in light because it took you 2 seconds to do that.
Okay.
But a wormhole bends space and time into, essentially, if you take a paper sheet and put the ends together and you make a hole through it and you go from one side to the other, then you are traveling the distance in a split second, but you're also traveling the actual distance faster than the speed of light.
Right.
But technically speaking, you can have a wormhole, quote unquote.
Okay. No,
and you are traveling faster than the speed of light, quote unquote, but you aren't because you're just doing it in a different way. So anyways, hard science versus science fiction, and
you get all nerdy for science shit.
I love that stuff. I used to watch that PBS channel on space. I forget what it's called.
Oh yeah. Oh god. When we go to Vermont and you stay in a hotel, they always have PBS on, and they still have.
Yeah, they do.
Those like different like science programs and things, and like space specific and other types of science, obviously, but like space specific shows and stuff. I think the last time we were there, there was like, I think it was on, right? We like saw it and you were like, I used to watch this.
Yeah. I watch it on the YouTube channel. It's great. I love doing that. I don't think I can ever be a scientist because I've done science classes and it's not really my forte unless I'm going into some, something that I already know and I don't have to learn. Then I would do it. That's fine. But yeah, doing it in practice,
it's very different.
Not my thing. Very different.
Yeah, it's very different. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, but it is for some people, like Andy Weir, right? So this guy...
looping it back around. Very nice.
Hey. Despite the fact that, yes, he's an author, from the books that I've read of his, like The Martian, Project Hail Mary, which has an adaptation coming, which apparently they've either finished filming or already started filming. I think they finished it.
That's with Ryan Gosling, right?
Exactly.
Nice. That is the reason I will watch it.
Well, I mean, you're going to see a lot of him because
I love Ryan Gosling.
The movie is literally just him for 90% of the time.
Listen, we're Canadians over here. We like Ryan Gosling.
So that, there's Artemis. So like he's written a lot of books. They are... all of them basically are hard science so far, at least the ones that I've read.
Right.
And he's done a lot of research in order to be able to write that. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, for some of his books, he had friends at NASA that he's contacted or that he's spoken to in order to make sure that his explanations and ideas actually make sense. And for The Martian, he had to do a lot of that because, we do have projects that are going to Mars right now.
Yes.
This is not something that is so far-fetched and out of reach that it's impossible to do.
And there are so many books, but also like film and television series because of like the actual real world work that's being done that are very focused on that as well, that are showing that as like a very distinct possibility. They're showing like TV shows and things where people are going to Mars. Like, what's that show that we watch? For All Mankind. That's it. Exactly. Where like they're making that into a reality on that show in that universe. Yeah, exactly. Right?
So he had to make sure that his things are properly done, properly researched. And then when he wrote it, he had some of his friends that are scientists read through that and point out that, this is impossible or that would not do that, etc. So he does go through a lot of research and in-depth, editing with that in mind. So I think the part of it, that's why I really loved his books. But also the other part of it is the whole kind of like MacGyver in space type of thing is that most of his books, at least The Martian and Project Hail Mary, revolve around one main character who's trying to survive in a almost impossible situation.
Right.
So like, on The Martian, he is
stranded,
left in Mars.
On Mars.
And that's it. And his crew left and they can't really turn back around because it is hard to do. You can't just be like, okay, let's do a U-turn on a ship that is traveling 10,000 kilometers an hour.
It doesn't work that way.
So, he has to live on Mars and try to make something out of it for months and months and months because until a resupply mission comes, that's 3-6 months.
If you guys have seen the movie, he plants potatoes or something, or he grows potatoes.
He has to grow potatoes because that's the only thing he has as elements. But in order to do that, you have to make earth that is able to have nutrients
like soil
to
that
grow
can
those potatoes,
sustain potatoes,
because Mars is barren. There's no nutrients in there or barely anything. So he has to, use poop that have been left there to make soil that is actually rich in nutrients.
Right. Well, because we use like manure and things like that, right? Like we don't think about it.
It's the same principle.
There's a cat climbing on your shoulder right now.
Yes, it's very disturbing.
He's so helpful.
So there's that. For Project Hail Mary, for example, this is basically I want to call it a one-way mission.
Okay.
And what happens in that is that there is something that we don't know, technically a parasite, that is siphoning the energy of the sun.
Oh.
And the sun is getting less warm, and therefore it's affecting our planet because that is super important for our survival.
Right.
Even 1 or 2 degree change, hello, global warming, makes a big difference for the whole planet in general, right? So there is a parasite or something that is siphoning the energy from the sun, and we as humans found what it could be, and this guy is sent there, and essentially he's just a school teacher. He's a science school teacher. He's basically a nobody. He's sent there with a crew of real scientists. And it ends up that he wakes up essentially by himself. I don't want to spoil too much.
Okay.
But he has to MacGyver his way into, first of all, making it to his destination.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how he can prevent it from happening or understand what's going on. But also on top of that, I'm pretty sure that's going to be in the trailer and description, he meets an alien species that obviously does not speak the language. But they have the same scientific principles that we do because, gravity is gravity. And sound travels at specific frequencies, and a color color is different. But anyways, there's different scientific principles that they can use to communicate with each other.
Okay.
So they have to, he has to essentially MacGyver himself into creating a different language that he can communicate with this alien species based on scientific principles that are universal to the universe.
Oh, okay.
Right. So there's a whole story with that develops. It's actually very interesting. It was a great book to
read. Is there a reason that you can remember from when you read it that he is selected to go on this mission, since you're saying he's a teacher? Like, is there a particular reason for it? Do you not want to spoil it?
Partial. I mean, it's not a big spoiler. From what I remember is that he was selected among some of the people who were supposed to go there.
Okay.
And he was supposed to be a project manager, or he was supposed to get the people to go and do it. But then something happens and the other person can go, or they get sick, or something happens.
Okay.
And he is basically on the replacement crew, and he has to go because he is the one who knows everything. He knows how the project works. He knows what to do. He knows what each member is. He's basically kind of a project manager, if you want to call it in that way. And there's no one else who can do it. No one else who has the knowledge that he has. And getting a person trained up means you're missing time. Meaning you're going to also miss the launch window because there are only specific times of the year you can launch to properly save on fuel and everything. Right, so like he ends up having to go.
Okay, because I mean, I don't know. I guess like you told me that, and I haven't read any of these books, so I have no idea. But it made me think of the whole thing of like, that's it, like civilians, like sending civilians into space and stuff, and like the Challenger flight that unfortunately, like, you know, tragically like blew up essentially back in the mid 80s, late 80s, I believe, after it was launched.
Earlier than that. Are you talking about the civilian teacher who went there?
Yeah.
She was the first teacher?
And she passed,
Yeah.
she died because like, the rocket exploded.
That was pretty recent.
Was it recent?
Yeah. Sorry, you were right.
Ha!
It is 86.
God, I'm good. Yeah, okay. Wait, have you read Artemis also?
Yes.
We have it, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, okay. Because it's like, you know, when I look at the covers, I'm like, I mean, I've seen these covers like sitting around in places, but like I can't remember what you have or haven't read at this point, because how would I keep track of that? But you know, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I read it. That was also a very interesting one. That is a murder mystery on the moon.
Oh.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, it's a murder mystery. There's nothing too crazy in there, but there is some hard science in there because, you know, they live in a huge hub and you have to take into account how the air is circulated and things that can happen. And she, you know, the person, the main protagonist, you know, she has to prove her innocence, but she's also a bit of a shady character in that society. And she's basically dealing with a huge corporation or an oligarch, I guess, if you want to call it, that is basically trying to frame her. Okay. And she has to prove her innocence.
Okay, so that's very different than the other one.
Yes, it's very different.
Because
there's a lot more characters.
It does look like Artemis, if I'm just looking at like Goodreads stuff, which like whatever, Goodreads can be bullshit a little bit too there. It was not as well received as Project Hail Mary and The Martian.
It is a very, very different book. It is a very, very different premise.
It could have been that also people read The Martian and it totally threw them off when this was published afterward
exactly,
as well.
Yeah, because like I said, The Martian, Project Hail Mary is very similar base in a sense that like it's MacGyver in space with one person that you follow through along. Here it's very different. You do follow the main character, but there's other different characters.
Yeah,
there's not much of crazy at stake situations.
Right.
It's, you know, she has to solve a mystery. Yes, she has to make like explosives and whatever using real science and stuff, but it's not as intense as the other books. I still really enjoyed it. It was a bit of a different take. I think I read it maybe somewhere after I read 6 Weeks by Mira Lafferty, which was also a closed room murder mystery in space, which I loved a lot. And that was, I guess, somewhere around there.
Around that same time.
Yeah,
well, it looks like The Martian was published in 2014, and then Artemis was second. It was in 2017, and then Project Hail Mary is the most recent. It was published in 2021.
Okay, well, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. And according to his bio, Andy Weir used to be a software engineer, so that was like his trade, and that was what he did previously. So I can only imagine that that's it. It was either probably like through his own knowledge, his own interests in science fiction, and then in communicating, that's it, with like contacts and people in these types of spaces that probably gave him a lot more knowledge about this, because I mean, otherwise how the hell would you know all this stuff?
That means you like that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, look, those books are very interesting. There's also, of course, a lot of other very good examples. I think The Expanse could be placed in there a little bit.
Okay. If there are principles of thing, I don't know.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, like maybe a little bit more sci-fi, but there's definitely some hard science there.
I mean, there's hello. There's the 3-body problem.
Oh yes, oh my god, of course.
Which is like its own, which is a trilogy of books, if I'm not mistaken, right? I'm not going to pronounce that author's name correctly, so I'm not going to do it. But they're by a Chinese author anyway. And I know that previously 3-body problem was made into, I believe, a Chinese series as well that already existed prior to the release of the series on Netflix, which came out last year, which was wildly popular. And there is a second season on the way. It's from the same creators as Game of Thrones, which you can tell because there's like a couple little people in there that you're like, oh, that person's in Game of Thrones.
Yeah. That's a good example as well. There's also something that you might not think of. We can completely switch gears now. Old book, 20 Leagues Under the Sea.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. 20 Leagues is not that far.
Yeah, Jules Verne.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, technically speaking, it is a science fiction book at base.
I guess it is, yeah, because everybody thinks of it as an adventure story, right? Of course, because
almost fantasy, I guess.
Because Captain Nemo and his crew take their submarine and they go exploring and all that kind of stuff, and it was, very, because I guess you lump it into like other adventure books, like I don't know, like Treasure Island and like things from similar time periods, well, not being published at the same time, obviously, but like similar time periods, like you lump it into that same category again, the way that you do with Frankenstein. Without thinking of it like, oh, well, it's just horror. It's just adventure. But like you're saying, that's it. It's true. There are scientific principles used and everything, of course, because they're navigating in a submarine. So there has to be, at its base, there has to be something.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but also, like, you've read that one? I'm assuming. I feel like everyone's read it.
Oh God, I don't even know. I might not have.
Oh
honestly.
God, terrible. That's a classic.
I know, but that might have been one of those classics. Yeah, that's the thing with me is that just because it says it's a classic, like, believe me, I've picked up multiple books in my life that people are like, well, it's a classic, you have to read it, and then you pick up that Charles Dickens book and you get halfway through and you're like, Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean,
just,
look,
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, and to study and do a lot of things with, I can understand it. However, reading like hefty enough classics or just classics in general that everyone lauds for pleasure is not really something that I do on a regular basis.
Fair enough. That makes sense. But I remember I read it when I was younger, and I did read through not a lot of it. I read all of it, obviously, but there's some parts, and I think that was probably the first book that I've done that to. There's some parts that I skipped.
Yeah,
there's
fair.
pages that I skipped because he starts talking about how they get to this island, and there's this bird, and the bird is part of this family, and it's a subspecies of this, and it relates. Anyways, there was like descriptions of the colors and the birds and the families and how it relates to this and etc. I was just skipping pages. Yeah. Literally skipping pages.
I think your brother recently read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely is one that like a lot of people just wind up picking up.
But again, a lot of it is hard science, right? Like the whole bird classification and the specimen trees and the species, whatever it is, that is hard science.
The navigation of the submarine and all that kind of stuff, and the underwater, like, sort of marine aspect of it. I'm sure there's a lot of hard science principles.
That's it. It's all hard science, but like the places that do arrive, they are more fantasy because giant birds don't exist or whatever it is. So like that is the fantastical element to it. But technically speaking, everything else in their travels and how he's built the ship and the species they encounter and trying to classify and everything. All that is, hard science at the base of it. So that is another one of those.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about that was published
a very long time ago.
Originally, all the way back there so it was serialized again, because a lot of stories at the time in the 1800s and stuff tended to be serialized in like magazines and different things. So they'd be released in portions, like in parts. This one was serialized from March of 1869 to June of 1870. And that's a French fortnightly periodical, which would, come out every 2 weeks, and they would release a portion of it each time. And it's such again, it's crazy to think about. And Shireen and I remember we're talking about this when we went to see Wicked, like a couple of months ago when that came out. And we were talking about that, it's just the idea of how much some of these stories have like endured, because like The Wizard of Oz was published in the year 1900, and we're 124 years later, and we are still talking about it. And we are still having adaptations. If I'm not mistaken, there is, I think Disney or someone might have done a like Nautilus 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea adaptation of some kind within the past like year or two. I don't think it was well received, but like it existed, because I think it was one of those that kind of languished in like weird production hell for a long time before it was actually made. But again, like the fact that we're still doing this, it's weird when I think, speaking of adaptations that are not good, whenever I think of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I think of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, because Captain Nemo is a character in that movie. Okay. Yes, I recall. Yeah, and he has like the submarine, like he has the Nautilus and all of that.
Yeah, they travel by and
stuff. That's what they use to travel into all the cities and stuff that they visit, and it just makes me chuckle, because also like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a super, super well-regarded graphic novel. Yes. And it's just like when you watch that movie, I don't know, I think it's a guilty pleasure for me, but it's terrible. Like it's really fucking bad. But I guess because when you come out of something like, when you're watching something and it's got all these like fiction characters from fiction in it, like literary characters, this is like, I wanted it to be like my Avengers. Like I want, like, because it's all these cool characters that you're like, oh, I've read stories with these characters in them. It didn't work. I'm sure it works in the graphic novel. Have not read it, but I'm sure it's wonderful and really well done. However, in the movie, it's like another story. But anyway,
it's not one of those that you can easily adapt. It just doesn't translate to screen.
Probably not, because it comes off as too kitschy, I get the feeling.
Same thing with Dark Tower. That's been in production.
Is that still happening? The TV show that they're...
Apparently it's still happening. Flanagan is still on it.
Christ almighty God, it's going to take forever.
The movie was terrible, but also the TV show, if you're going to do it, that's like minimum
Well, it makes
8 seasons.
I mean,
9 seasons minimum.
but I mean, like, I feel like from the jump, this should have always been a TV series.
Of course, you can't do that in an hour and a half movie that they tried, which is terrible. Don't ever do that because it's such a big project. Even if you do it at now, because now movies are much longer that your butt hurts by the time you're done with it. But even if you do it in 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 45 minutes, still not enough.
No, it's not enough. It's not enough time to cover all the material because when you're looking at something like this, that's it. That's a series of 7 novels.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
8?
7 or 8, I think it's 7 anyway. Like when you're looking at something that expansive, there's just no way, it's not possible. And it's going to be the same thing with 3-Body Problem because I've seen those books and they are tomes
of course, they're huge.
Of information. And even like, I know Shireen made an attempt to start reading that first one, and I think I don't think she made it more than a few chapters because it was just like delving so specifically into like physics principles.
Right.
And they do explain them. So I think my understanding from seeing the different perspectives from herself and her husband, who is like well aware of many of these principles already and has studied a lot of them and has a PhD in medical physics. So he has like a really big base of knowledge for these things. For him, it was almost easy because he read the novel and he was like, yes, but the author explains all of these different principles of physics or whatever else it is that he's speaking about in, fairly detailed ways.
Please.
Like, so for you to be able to keep up with. However, so if I'm thinking about it from her perspective and my perspective, if you're coming at that from the perspective of someone who has no background in any kind of science this way, not as a hobby, not as a field of study, nothing whatsoever, it will still not make any sense to you. And when we started watching 3-Body Problem, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. And there's still quite a bit of it that I'm like, I don't know. I think I kind of understood like the majority of what it was by the end because they got into great detail with it.
Yes.
But there were like, I think the first 2 or 3 episodes, I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this whole fucking show, man. Like if I feel like I'm stupid while I'm watching it and I can't keep up with it, you kind of get discouraged by the idea of it eventually. So when it kind of started opening up more and there was more development, it made more sense, but it took me a bit.
Right.
It was mostly like I was watching it because you were watching it and I was sitting in the same room.
I love that one.
I know. See, that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying because you have an interest in these kinds of scientific principles and so you have a base understanding of them to start off with. And then when you're coming at something from a different perspective, it's difficult. And that's why I think hard science fiction probably only, appeals to a certain demographic. And now that's not to say that it's a small one. Look at how successful something like The Martian was. And I'm sure that Project Hail Mary will more than likely be the same.
I think so, yeah. It has a big name attached to it. They have a big name
attached to it. The Martian was already very successful and people know Andy Weir as an author now. So I would be surprised if it weren't.
Yeah, they just have to execute it well.
Yeah, true. So I think if they do that, it will probably be well received, I would think. But again, I can see how like the appeal of it just isn't going to work for like a large faction, of moviegoers or readers just in general. Because it's just something that, again, like, if you sit me down and I watch something like this, if I can grasp some of what's going on, I can enjoy myself. But if you ask me to pick up the book, like...
Yeah, I think it's different. It's I think it's much better translated into movies. And this is kind of like... I guess something we can close on is like, is it becoming more popular and why?
Yeah.
I think that, it's kind of hard to say without data, and I'm all about data at work specifically.
Oh, God. So many spreadsheets.
That it's becoming popular. It's hard to say, but I think why it's being successful, I guess, is that, yes, it is sci-fi. Yes, it is a little bit more hard science, but at least in the movies or in the TV shows that they do talk about it and portray it properly and that are interesting, they make it more of an adventure movie than anything else.
Yeah, they do. It's true.
So like the adventure aspect of it, the funny aspect of it, like in The Martian, it was very funny.
Yeah, it's true. And I will have to give Matt Damon kudos because for somebody who had to be in most scenes by himself, he did a lot in that movie.
Yeah, exactly. So like I think it's that aspect that is attracting people and that is making those movies or books, I guess, successful. Because even in the books, it was pretty funny. They had funny moments. And same thing for Project Hail Mary. you know, so it becomes a funny adventure that just has some science sprinkled in because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the attraction to those works.
Yeah, I can understand that. That makes sense. And I do think that there is something to, no matter who you are and like what your base of knowledge is, including myself, who didn't really have much of a knowledge base in terms of like science or scientific principles at all. The idea of the understanding that you can develop while watching something because you see what the person is doing or what they're working with, and these are things that you know and that at their core you understand to an extent, and so it makes it more relatable and then makes the story probably that much easier to digest for you as an audience member or a reader in some cases too for people. And just I think that it probably helps to like ground things a little bit, you know, like we do like a story that's very fantastical and very different, but it's also nice to read something sometimes that is grounded in reality.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Anyway, I'd be curious to know what people's kind of, I guess, opinions are about that in terms of like science fiction and like hard science fiction. You know, do you like it? Do you not like it? Because either you find it, I don't know, like do you find it boring or whatever it is? Like, you know, do you like enjoy it because you find that relatability with it? Or is there like something else to it for you? Anyway, you can let us know about all of those different aspects of things on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, all the things at fullybookedca. And obviously feel free to head over to the website at fullybooked.ca so that you can check out everything that our members are contributing for Science Fiction Month. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.